Okay, it'll be the first of future live video discussions on the Melbourne On Transit YouTube channel. I'm your host, Peter Parker, and looks like we've got 7 people listening, or watching, so that's great. And we're here. Thought I'd do this just on the impulse because a new Victoria bus plan has come out. So there's some interesting things in it that I thought I'd talk about. If you want to have a comment or a question, then you can use the chat window on the right of the screen if you're looking at it on a home PC. But first of all, I'll run you through the bus review. I've had a bit of a read through it myself, and then later on we'll have more of a discussion. Here I've had a basically there's 17 pages. There's a link that I've provided just at the top of the chat or in the comments or in the my own comments section if you're watching this on YouTube afterwards. If the lighting isn't very good on your screen, it's my end, not your end. I should do something about it. But anyway, it's mainly going to be about audio. And so provided you're hearing me okay, then that's the main thing that counts. First of all, it's what the bureaucrats would call a high-level document. So there's not much in the way of maps or specific proposals. The details will be later in bus reform implementation plan. That's something that's coming out later. So this thing is basically a framework, a big picture framework document. And speaking overall, it's last 5 or 6 years, some of the background has been, the government's been, as you're no doubt aware, very active in transport infrastructure, metro tunnel, airport rail, suburban rail loop, level crossing removals, and a lot of road projects as well. Our service has not had the same sort of emphasis. It's all been 99% about infrastructure. There was a lot being done on service. The last big impetus for that was about 10 or 15 years ago. But the momentum for that has gradually grown to a halt. The peak activity was probably between about 2006 and 2010, 2011, when a lot of bus routes got upgraded services, longer hours, and there were also new orbital and Doncaster smart bus routes being implemented as well. So that resulted in a big uplift in the amount of service kilometres being run on the buses and a similar uplift in patronage. They pretty much matched each other one-to-one. So that was quite a transformative thing. But the last smart bus went in about nearly 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago. So overall, the pace of reform since then has probably slowed. There were some upgrades a bit more recently, up to 2013, 2014, 2015. They've been very much smell of the oily rag upgrades. So there have been quite radical changes to some bus routes, but they weren't as expensive as the big orbital smart bus routes. They're worthwhile reforms, but done very much on the cheap. In terms of, and the result is that Melbourne's had strong population growth. Service per capita has fallen, particularly in the last 8 to 10 years. We just haven't been adding the amount of service as we have been people. There's a graph that I'd refer you to that Graham Curry from Monash University has done that shows that quite boldly, falling service per capita. And even the pace of service reform, potentially low-cost upgrades, that's slowed down a lot in the last 5 or 6 years. And if you were to look at today, it's a Sunday and a long weekend. If you were to catch a metro train from Craigieburn or Sunshine, it would still be only every 40 minutes in the morning. In the evenings, the service would be down to 30 minutes on almost all lines. Now, COVID has changed travel patterns so that instead of public transport, the emphasis being on commuter peak travel to the CBD, if public transport's going to survive and be useful at all, it's going to have to be used for diverse trip types with potentially a lower peak usage. So the focus on planning is likely to have to change to all-day service rather than catering for the peaks, which are very expensive to provide service for because of the peak vehicle requirement and track capacity issues and so forth. So it's not just all about the peaks, and that has historically had higher priority in planning, particularly for rail. So we need to think about off-peak, all-day, other uses apart from CBD travel. And that's where buses can really come into their own, and bus patronage has fallen less than train and tram patronage during the COVID period. Now, there are signs that the relative slowness in the pace of network reform is starting to turn around. January the 31st, we had some train timetable changes, which boosted train services. They didn't add a huge number of trips compared to the number of trips that currently run. But what they did do is they put the trips at certain days, at certain times of the day, so that the maximum waits on some lines was reduced dramatically. For instance, Werribee line was previously every 40 minutes on a Sunday morning. Weekend evenings, 30 minutes waits. Now, at almost any time you catch the Werribee line train, the maximum wait is every 20 minutes. Similarly, on the Frankston line, there's been some similar improvement there. Again, maximum wait 20 minutes, except for when the night network's running. Same with the Williamstown line. So there was a significant service upgrade to Metro trains 31st of January this year. So that was a big advance, and it would be great to have that extended to more lines. And it would also be good to have more 10-minute frequencies on our busier lines. So it was a big step forward, and hopefully it's the start of some other changes on other lines. And it also reverses some service cuts made in 1978, which were pretty much Metropolitan Ride. Before then, evening trips Monday to Saturday were every 20 minutes across the network. They were all cut to every 30 minutes. So it's good that we're slowly coming out of that service cut over 40 years ago. We just need to reverse the cuts on the other line. And thanks for the comment. It's easier to get into the city on a Sunday morning. So, yep, that's exactly 20 minutes isn't quite turn up and go, but it's far better to miss a train and wait 19 minutes than 40 minutes, which was previously often the case. On the buses, we've seen a long stagnation where not much happened for a while. But here too, I think there's scope for optimism. The 2021 state budget, I had it right up on my blog, had more for buses than 2020. And also quite critically, it mentioned bus network reform. Recent budgets didn't mention bus network reform, but 2021's did. So that's a good sign. And then there were some announcements today. I won't go into the detail. I haven't seen all the detail of the specific announcements. I'll no doubt have blog posts on that later on when they come out. Anyway, what is happening, one of the things that will happening is to simplify the night network so that instead of having all the buses run special route numbers that are different overnight on weekends versus during the day, and other times there'll be some routes that will run 24 hours on weekends. So that's a great step forward in making the bus network generally easier to understand. That some people might even choose to live near bus routes that have 24-hour weekend service. So that will further increase patronage. Again, I'll do a later blog post when more details of that come out. Now, the bus plan itself, it's a high-level document. It's based around 6 broad actions. Next 2 years is the preparation work. I haven't seen any tweets from David Davis or the Greens. They could arguably say that maybe things should move a bit faster. But anyway, so the next 2 years is mainly preparation. There'll be some smaller bus changes, but the major initiatives will start from 2023. Now, also bear in mind on that, 2022 is November 2022 is the state election. So I'm saying that I think the timing of this is quite interesting. They'll have developed a lot of their ideas by the November 2022 election, so they may be in a position to be able to promise them as things happening in future years. Which is interesting. If you look at different state elections, the 2018 election had very, very few bus changes and very few promises were made. The Liberals made a promise, I think, the day before, but they didn't sell it at all. They didn't tell you what areas would gain, what marginal seats would gain. I think it was some significant funding, but it was very poorly promoted. In the case of Labor, their pitch was all about infrastructure, and particularly the suburban rail loop and level crossings. The Greens had some bus plans as well. But overall, 2018 was buses got very little of a look in. And some other state elections didn't have a lot, some did. Like in 2010, a lot of bus upgrades were put in just a month or two before the state election, like the smart bus, some smart bus orbitals and the Doncaster routes. Similarly, in 2006 election, before then, there are some upgrades there meeting our transport challenges. Some of those upgrades were done either then or early in 2007. So yeah, it's good that so we're likely to have some good pre-election bus policies, which we haven't necessarily had in all recent elections. And we'll be looking very much towards the 2022 state budget that delivers on that. And remember, another thing, there's about a 2-year lead time between when a budget funds even a bus route or a new bus route and when it gets implemented. For more on that, I wrote a blog post that goes into that in quite a bit more detail. So getting funding is essential, but there's also a lag time for other things after that. Anyway, I'll talk about the 6 actions in the bus plan in a moment. But first of all, the plan has a section on what do we know. For example, frequency, span, and timeliness of service are the primary drivers of customer satisfaction. It might be obvious to you and to me here, but it's really important to say it. You have to restate it until you get tired of saying it, and then you have to say it again. These are the basics that determine whether a bus network is useful or not. Frequency, span, and timeliness. A few other things as well, like route directness, but yeah. Got to get the basics right. And in the plan, it's good that they acknowledge that, and they even have a nice every 10 minutes icon. Also, they mention people overwhelmingly walk to the bus, so pedestrian access, like being able to cross the road to get to a stop, is key. Information about the service, that is critical. It's interesting that they say it's evenly split between online and at the stop. There's been a lot of development, a lot of stress with online information, like apps and so forth, but also important, I think, stop information, particularly at the interchanges. In some areas recently, we've gone backwards. Like at one time, bus stops used to have network maps on the back. If you go to a bus stop now, that's just been replaced by how do you use Mikey and go to a website or whatever. So it would be good to have a renewed focus on better information at stops. And when you compare us versus other states, other cities, the gap in information is particularly great at interchanges. We have an approach where information is about the same at a stop, whether it's an infrequent bus route with one bus route going past in the middle of nowhere and a major interchange. And we've really got to sort that out with some much better information about big interchanges and major stations. Now, the plan aims to exploit big build infrastructure projects and talks a bit about innovation. Now, I want to insert a cautionary note here about innovation. It can be good. It has all these flashy things, but a lot of this is timeless. Like things like your service frequency, operating hours, direct routes. That's been the case for as long as public transport's been going. And I think that you probably get more return out of spreading that over a wider area and benefiting more people on that than to be rushing off and talking about the latest app or the latest rideshare demand thing, or mobility as a service, which is basically a different way of paying for service, and there's a risk that other people, including non-transport people, get a bit of the money when you should be trying to keep as much of your fare revenue into the network as possible, and hopefully feeding into improved service. So demand responsive services, they are mentioned in the plan. They possibly have a place. I don't think it's a very big one. And I won't go into it too much. I've discussed the limitations in blog posts, but I think you basically leave demand responsive services to the end. Try and get your basic bus routes right first, review networks on fixed routes, and only consider demand responsive in exceptional circumstances for very small niche pockets. Here's something that's really good. I found that they acknowledged a problem, and I think it's about one of the first times they've acknowledged this, and I'll quote from them. There is also often a mismatch between demand and frequency, with low service frequency on some high patronage routes or high frequency on low demand routes. I talk about this endlessly in my blog posts. I talk about a route like the 695, which is out east of, out through unurbanized areas, that runs every half hour off peak. So does the 733, which runs from Box Hill, Monash Uni, Clayton. Very different catchments, very different patronage levels, very different boardings per kilometre, yet they both operate at a similar operating frequency. Even worse, we've got smart buses going through semi-rural or industrial areas that run every 15 minutes. They run until midnight, whereas there's other routes through densely populated areas that don't have those sorts of frequencies. So I think there's a lot of scope for bus reform there, and it's great that the plan has acknowledged that's an issue. We need to rethink some of our service levels, and it's good that they see that as an opportunity. Now, the big picture, and we still need more bus service kilometres. Service per capita has been falling. We need to get back to where we have been, and in fact build on that. Even if we had kept service kilometres per capita the same as 8 years ago, we could have had a lot more smart bus routes, a lot more frequency than we have. So the big picture is service per capita really needs to stop its decline and turn around. A smaller picture is we need to use what we're running a bit more efficiently, including optimising service to where it's likely to be used better. And that requires bus reform. And my Friday blog posts in particular talk about that a lot. Unscrambling routes. That's a welcome acknowledgement that routes are a bit confusing. And if they're indirect, then people aren't going to use them. Integration with big build projects or even level crossing removals. That's been poorly done in the past. Now, the whole reason why some bus routes are as they are, like some bus routes stay on one side of the railway line to the other. They could go to the other side of the line, but they don't always. Part of that might have been historical boundaries between operators. Like if you look at the line out to Ringwood, there's a lot of bus routes that stay north of the line and a lot of routes that stay south of the line. There's some smart bus orbitals that go from south to north, but otherwise you've got routes that just stay in their patch, and potentially there's some useful scope for reform there. And an argument for not having buses going across level crossings was because of the unreliability of the boom gates being down for a lot of the time. Anyway, with the level crossings gone, then that problem is no longer the case. So I think there's scope to be reforming buses there, but too many times we've removed the level crossings, we haven't reformed the bus network. Similarly, Southland Station, there's a big scope there to reform local buses. Like there could have been a direct Bay Road route to Sandringham that could have connected two railway lines at Southland and the Frankston line and Sandringham line. That hasn't been done. It would be relatively low cost to do. And particularly where we've got our further builds, further level crossing removals, further shutdowns, it's important to have a resilient network that means that if the trains are shut on one line, you can easily get a train on one line, get a regular route bus across to another line. So it also makes the network more resilient. if there are disruptions, both planned and unplanned. So I think that's an area that needs extra emphasis. So hopefully they will try to catch up on some of that network reform. And I'm aware that planning on this is afoot in the Northeast Link area, with Doncaster Busway and that sort of thing. So I think that might be one of the major areas that gets bus reform under this stage. Now, growth pressures in outer areas. That's another issue. Tarneet is a really standout example. 7 years ago, Tarneet Station didn't exist at all. Now it's V-Line's busiest outside Southern Cross. Same deal with the buses. The buses there and at Williams Landing, Craigieburn, are super productive, yet most of them are still only every 40 minutes off peak. I've got a blog post, I talk about it, buses for our booming ethnoburbs, and it looks at the demographic characteristics of areas like Tarneet and Craigieburn. And although they still have, most of the bus routes are every 40 to 60 minutes, it really no longer cuts it in those sorts of areas, because you've got the house blocks are much smaller. Instead of being 600 square metres, they might be more like 300 or 400 square metres. And there's even townhouses that are even smaller. So you've got vastly increased densities. You've got people working multiple jobs. If you look at car ownership in areas like Tarneet, the outer suburbs are not what they used to be in all cases. Your car ownership is surprisingly low, and you might have a lot of adults working jobs, but not all have their own cars. So you've got great bus patronage performance in some of these routes. And you've got high population density. So you've got, and the stations out there are widely spaced. There's pressures for parking as well, and it's very expensive to add new parking. So all these generate the preconditions for really high bus patronage. So it's important that service keep up. So instead of having a basic 40-minute service, it really probably needs to be every 20 minutes off peak and 10 minutes peak and better operating hours. You've got suburbs as dense as West Brunswick should not have the sparse service you see out at Lilydale. And just to clarify, that's all my words. The plan doesn't actually say that, but they do mention fixing the mismatch between usage and frequency. So hopefully they'll tackle those points. Net zero emissions from buses, that's another theme. Currently trials, I think there is consensus there we need to do and move a bit faster. It's even better if we get people onto high occupancy, zero emissions public transport, not just zero emissions public transport, but high occupancy, and which is why you need your network reform. Planning bus travel is acknowledged as being complicated in the plan. And they talk about real-time information and journey planning tools. Almost as an afterthought, direct routes are mentioned, but it is good that it is mentioned. I'd like them to have given that top priority because most people know the roads. The planning principle of one bus, one road. If the bus follows the main road for most of the way, then people know the road network, then they'll know the bus network. So that's a bonus, even for people that might not be familiar with using buses. And basically the bus network, the mental maps of the bus network for most people are just like a bowl of tangled noodles. So if you can untangle that, then I think that would help improve usability. Another thing I think they could have stressed more, simpler timetables, and very topical this weekend, standardised public holiday patterns. At the moment, you've got some bus routes, most bus routes, a Saturday timetable runs on public holidays, but there are still quite a number of bus routes where they might run on Saturdays, but does Saturday timetable operate on public holidays? No, there's no service on public holidays. There's no reason for that. It's just a matter of history that's been inherited from bus operators. A lot of routes missed out on getting upgrades under a previous bus plan. So it would be great to bring those and standardise those. And I didn't see any mention in the bus plan of that. Now, what to do about all this? The plan seems to have diagnosed the issues quite well with the bus network. Now, there's 6 reform objectives. Actually, you could call it this plan the 666 plan. There are 6 aims in the plan, there are 6 reform objectives, and there are 6 actions. Now, the reform objectives, making the network simpler, faster, and more reliable. There'll be a hierarchy of bus routes. Top hierarchy is what they call rapid routes, then connector routes and local routes. So 3 tiers, and within those tiers are 2 or 3 different types of service. Now, I really think the plan could have been more specific on that. Although you'd think the rapid routes are the more frequent services, they don't actually list basics like frequencies and operating hours. They don't say that your rapid routes will run until midnight and they'll be every 10 minutes during the day and 20 minutes at night. They're the sort of service level type things that we need to be applied for each tier of bus routes so that you have a usable service. It might often be turn up and go, especially during the day. It might even affect and influence land use decisions. If you're near a rapid route, then you've got a great service that you can base your decisions, like whether to set up a shop, whether to purchase another car. If you didn't want to buy an extra car for your household, then you might buy a house near a top tier route because you know the service will be a frequent route and that's useful. But they don't actually mention that in the plan at all. They just use descriptions like rapid, connector, and local, and really they should give some good frequency and operating hours. Another interesting thing is the rapid. There's some different terminology here. Like the top tier, they call the rapid route. There was a picture elsewhere in the plan of a smart bus, which was the top tier of service in the 2006 Meeting Our Transport Challenges plan. So you've got some different terminology there. We don't know whether they'll keep, or they seem to be winding back on smart bus. Some of the bus liveries no longer have the smart bus thing. Whether you should have a frequent network that applies across all modes, that's possibly something you might want to do. Now, another thing, N-Class 468, PPTN. Now, that is really, really important. PPTN, for those not familiar, is Principal Public Transport Network. And there are planning documents that talk about locating on the Principal Planning Transport Network. And the idea, and there was a map that was published a little while ago. I did a blog post on this that talks about Principal Public Transport Network and how it could affect land use and transport decisions. So if you bring your high service and direct public transport on these corridors, then that's where you can have your high density, you can have your more transport dependent land uses, you can build your universities and colleges and have good direct public transport service. And unfortunately, there's a bit of a mismatch here. The planning documents talk about Principal Public Transport Network. This talks about rapid, connector, and local routes, and they don't really join the two, and they probably should. And arguably, they should also in passenger-facing information, like the concept of a 10-minute network across all modes could be another thing, and that could be tied to the PPTN and the rapid routes. So I think that it's a little bit disappointing there. They haven't quite got the integrated planning right, and they also haven't defined these service levels, operating hours, and frequencies. Now that's the first of the reform objectives. The second one was a cleaner, faster fleet, and by cleaner they mean low emissions. But they're also mentioning articulated and middle-sized buses. So there could be cases where on your main fast routes you can have articulated buses, provided you're already up to a good frequency. Though you might be starting to rethink about that. Like if the peak is becoming less peaky, then maybe the need for articulated buses will be a bit less than what we might have thought, say, 2 or 3 years ago before COVID. So that's something that might need to be rethought. Have to be a bit careful with bus fleet sizes. If we have too much of a variety of bus fleets, then you can have then maintenance becomes an issue. Also, you might have a case of a bus route that might normally sustain a smaller size bus. It might be in a quieter suburb, But there might be times during peak times, especially if the route goes past a school, that you do need your full-size bus to accommodate your peak travel demand. And from the point of view of operating costs, and driver labour is a major part of that, then having a bigger bus, even though it might appear empty most of the time, might actually be a more cost-effective approach. So there needs to be a bit of a thinking about that there. And also there's the transition to zero emission, and that's been mentioned in previous budgets and information there. Number 3, better performing buses with priority measures and better interchanges. The priority measures is important because time is money with buses. If you're able to make your bus route 5 or 10 minutes faster, then you can either upgrade the frequency or you can run fewer buses on a route, and that improves your customer service because passengers get a quicker trip, and also means that you can do more things with your bus fleet and have them on more routes. So, yeah, bus speed is absolutely critical. And if you look at old timetables from buses and travel times, you can see how much slower some of the main road bus routes have become, all because of car traffic making buses run slowly. So things like bus priority is important. And you know, some of the smart bus routes, although they are our top tier of bus routes, even some of those are quite slow to travel. Better interchanges as well. I should mention the rapid running trial that's currently running on bus route 246. That's one of only 2 full service bus routes in Melbourne that run every 10 minutes. So I think that's one of the reasons why they chose that. And the rapid running trial is that instead of buses waiting to catch up to their timetable, they will just deploy the buses regardless. I think they probably have to monitor them to maintain reasonable spacing. Where it can work, where you've got a really frequent service, where you don't have a frequent service, then people would prefer a reliable service tied to the timetable. The only other route we have in Melbourne that's a 7-day route that runs every 10 minutes is the 402 that runs between Footscray and East Melbourne. So there are hints that there might be more rapid running routes. So really, that's, apart from the 246, that's the only route you can do it on with a 10-minute service, unless you're to say, okay, we'll do it on a 15-minute service, which 15 minutes I don't think is really turn up and go really. So maybe there would be cases where you have so much time saving that you can improve the service. But anyway, it's something that is being tested on one route, so it'd be interesting to see what happens there. Point number 4, better customer experience. There are many factors of that, like accessibility. I'm pleased that network design is included as a factor here, because it's cases where you read about customer experience for public transport, and too often it's divorced from network planning. There seem to be different user experience people that might not be bus people. They might have other professional records. So it's really good that network design is included as a factor here. And so should timetables, because if you've got a timetable that doesn't operate on public holidays but operates on Saturdays, and another timetable of a route next to it doesn't run, then that's a part of bad customer experience. If you've got it makes one of the things that makes a bus route complex. Same with bus routes that are every 22 minutes. Instead of having a memory service that's every 20 minutes, every 22 means you can't remember the timetable, and it probably also isn't going to connect with your trains every 20 minutes. And we have a lot of bus routes every 22, 23, 24 minutes in Melbourne, and they have just run like that for decades, and they have not been reformed. So hopefully that sort of knowledge flows through into better customer experience. Governance and systems management. Maybe it's not one of the bigger points, but I think it's quite important in terms of information systems. I've tried to use the bus tracking thing sometimes, and you see it, it looks good. Okay, there's a bus in 2 minutes or whatever, and wait 2 minutes and there's no bus, and then it just disappears off the screen, and then there's another bus in 15, 20 or whatever minutes. And then you think, oh, maybe you should give up riding this, getting this bus, but maybe it was cancelled. But and it just disappears. But then you wait a little bit longer and the bus sometimes comes. So why it wasn't on the system, but the bus was running, I think you really, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of performance. I could be wrong here, in the way of performance standards in relation to passenger information, especially real-time information. But you've really got to have, your bus tracking and your data systems right. Otherwise, if you've got a tracking system that is less reliable than the service that runs, then there's really not much point having it. So, information systems is critical, and also not only the the online real-time stuff, but also service disruptions and information interchanges. Better value for money. They talk about industry partnerships a bit. Anyway, so that's the 6 main reform objectives. We're not getting. I've spoken a bit long on this, so I do want to now before I get on to your comments, and it's been great. There's been a lot of chat window, a lot of feedback there, so that's fantastic. I've got 19 people watching. I thought I'd do, though, the 6 actions. Remember, it's the 666 plan, 6 aims, 6 reform objectives, and 6 actions. First action is to develop the bus reform implementation plan. No doubt they'll call it the BRIP. Second action, work with industry for zero emissions fleet. Thirdly, possibly of most interest, route changes to transform the network so it meets your needs. And they mentioned some areas that are priority areas. Most of them have been mentioned in the budget, last state budget. Mornington Peninsula, basically Route 788 upgrade. I'm not sure if there'll be other things in there. Fisherman's Bend, Yarra Valley as well. Also, a proposal for a shuttle between Victoria Park and Melbourne Uni. I'm glad that's still on the agenda because that went all very quiet. I think it got mentioned in the 2018 state budget. Normally takes a couple of years for a bus route to happen. Still hasn't happened, so it's good that that's still on the agenda. Also, big changes in Doncaster area associated with the proposed busway system. And some growth area routes, some routes particularly in the Tarnee, Wyndham area, and mention of experiments with on-demand transit. One case with Knox, it's in the plan. I hope they think really hard about it because I'm not sure if it's the cure-all that some suggest it is. Fourthly, systems and technology for better data for planners, so we actually know where people get on and get off the bus usage. Like parts of a bus route may be very heavily used. Like take the smart bus orbitals, for instance. One of the issues with the smart bus orbitals are 4-hour-long bus routes, and a route like the 903, you've got some areas where it gets really heavy usage, like areas like Box Hill, Chadstone, Oakley. That's a really busy part of the route. But then other areas where it goes through industrial areas like between Sunshine and Altona North, where its usage is much less. Yet most of the time it's a similar type of service level, and need to think about whether that's the best use of bus resources. Hopefully some better data will assist in service planning there. Maybe they'll think about breaking up the orbitals. I've suggested some ideas there. There's also scope for where you've got all parts of orbitals that parallel existing bus routes, because the orbitals in some areas, particularly in Melbourne's north and west, were just layered over existing bus routes. And if you can simplify services so you just have one route that runs every 10 minutes, I think that's overall a more simpler and easier to use service that will get better use. There's some data there, and also information interchanges I think is important, not just real-time information, but hopefully better mapping and wayfinding and accessibility, and also information for passengers, like more reliable real-time. Customer experience, I mentioned the rapid running trial before. I noticed someone mentioned on Twitter, they mentioned that they didn't particularly like the rapid running, so they were waiting too long from the bus. So I think that really needs to be very carefully managed and supervised. You can't just leave, you really need to be active deployment to ensure there isn't too long gaps between bus departures and it's not all lumpy. And it really only works, I think, on turn up and go bus routes, and we don't have a lot of them. So yeah, its applicability may be a bit limited, but if we had more routes that ran every 10 minutes, maybe there's scope to expand it. Also, improvements to interchanges and an accessibility strategy. That's an important issue with trams in particular. But I think with buses, you need to think about accessibility a bit more broadly. Not only is it a matter of getting on the bus, but it's no good just to have a bus stop that might tick all the boxes for accessibility, but you can't cross the road. The footpath might disappear before it gets to the bus stop, or the footpath might approach only from one direction. I think that's really important for accessibility, given, and the plan itself even acknowledges that nearly everyone who catches a bus walks to the stop. 6, on-road priority. So that's the basic 6 actions. Develop the bus reform improvement plan, work with industry for zero emission fleet, transform the bus network to meet user needs, technology for better data, measures to improve customer experience, on-road priority. So that's your 6. Now, before we put it over to general comment, one thing I thought the plan was a little bit short on was some figures. But before that, I'll just reiterate the basic timeline. 2021 to 2023 is the BRIP, so that's where they're doing a lot of the planning work. There might be some small-scale service upgrade work, like the improvements to the night network and some other routes. I noticed that some routes were getting some off-peak or weekend upgrades, so that was good. Mention was made of 293 and 223. I think there'll be some more. I think it was 19 routes, the night network. But overall, the next 2 years will be mainly for planning for the bus reform implementation plan. But even using the term bus reform is a bit of a breakthrough, because for quite a long time, they didn't want to know about it. They were just interested in infrastructure. I wrote a couple of blog posts about, there was one case of a radical train timetable change in 2015 that was basically going to happen but didn't. And same with the revised Transdev network. There were promises to have a different network reform there. Bits of it happened, but really not much. So it's good that they are picking up again on bus reform, and they're not afraid to use that term. And then, 2023 to 2030 is the main period that they'll be implementing. So that's where we hope to be seeing some really substantial transformative stuff. And then more included from 2030. Now, one good thing is they talk about the utility of buses as mass transit. It's quite good, because for a while there was almost like a planning fashion that, your trains are your mass transit, maybe your trams, but buses were really only local transport for children to get to school or granny to go to the shops, all that sort of thing. But with a large city like Melbourne, where you've got significant demand between outer suburbs, and also the travel times are quite slow on some of your orbital routes, we really do need to be thinking of buses as in the mass transit thing. Like, that means a frequent service, possibly wider space stops, definitely bus priority, and really good travel speeds. So it's good that they're thinking of buses as mass transit, not only on your radial corridors like Doncaster into the city. There's a few other quite good corridors as well, like the 220 from Sunshine through Braybrook into the city, 250. But I think also particularly for getting around in orbital transport. Like the Smart Bus was a start of that. It was good at its time, but it's every 15 minutes off peak, 30 minutes on weekends. Today it's a Sunday night. Even just like a local route, the Smart Buses all shut down at 9 p.m. And if we're talking about serious mass transit, we need good frequency, preferably every 10 minutes, 7 days a week. If not, no worse than every 20 minutes, evenings and weekends. And how we've got Smart Bus set up, it was good, revolutionary at the time, but we need almost like a Smart Bus Mark II to build upon that. And then you've got things like the suburban rail loop. We could potentially have a suburban rail loop smart bus that start to bring forward some of the benefits of suburban rail loop sooner with smart bus routes. So it starts to establish the general travel patterns. What would I have liked to have seen in the plan? Well, thing is, need a bag of money. And yes, there is mention of the initiatives in the 2021 budget, but you need more. Even for smaller things where you've got bus routes duplicating one another, it still requires a bit of money to plan and start to reform some of those networks. To increase your service levels per capita, to reverse the decline we've seen over the last 7 or 8 years, that needs money. You need to buy more buses. You need to roster more bus drivers for more of the week, not just during the peak periods, not just on weekends, but also on weekdays, but also on weekends as well. So you need money to do that, but that is actually also a very economical way of creating jobs. And if you're boosting your off-peak and weekend service, you can largely already do it with the existing bus fleet. So that is something that can be implemented relatively quickly. So that is something that I think would have been good if we actually saw substantial funding for new services. Another thing I would have liked to figures, things like we need some goals. There is a patronage goal that came up. People following on Twitter might have seen this. It was mentioned at a Metropolitan Transport talk a while ago, and that was a patronage goal of getting up to 200 million passengers by 2030. It was an ambitious goal. Even before COVID, we were at about 120 million bus passengers per year. But if you really revamped the bus network and did a lot of things quickly, you might have been able to achieve it. But this plan has no patronage goals. So I think that would have been desirable. Another thing that would have been desirable, and I mentioned this in relation to the hierarchy of bus routes, is some service standards and coverage standards. One of the planning things was for coverage was the idea that 95% of people within 400 metres of a bus route. I think that was quite popular around if you look at some of the old bus reviews that were done about 15 years ago, it was almost like an article of faith that there would be a performance standard in bus network coverage that 95% of people would be within 400 metres of a bus route that ran every hour. So admittedly, every hour is not a great service level to aspire to. It was described as a basic safety net coverage thing. But given the growth of new suburbs, I think you still need some sort of bus coverage performance standard. And the new bus plan doesn't actually have that. You also need some sort of, we want to aspire to better than buses once an hour. So I think you also need a sort of a coverage goal, but for the frequent network or the useful network, depending on how you want to call it. Something like, 80% of the population are within 800 metres of a bus every 20 minutes or better, and maybe 50% within a bus every 10 minutes or better. Some sort of performance standard that gives you an idea what you want to achieve, and different ways of doing bus network reform can get you closer or further from those standards. So basically something that, maybe buses every 20 minutes nearer to 2 million more Melburnians and 1 million more jobs. That sort of thing. We need some numbers there to give you a bit more of a focus, and the bus plan doesn't seem to do that as much. And we should have not only for minimum standard levels, like was done around 15 years ago, but also for decent standard levels that give you a good level of service. You could argue that operating hours as well. Most people should have buses, 7 days a week until midnight or something like that, or 10 p.m. For local routes. So, we definitely need service standards in the plan, and I think the plan is quite weak in that it doesn't define those very well. So that's pretty much all I said. I think the Minister Ben Carroll is to be commended for bringing out the plan and also getting the agenda to talk about bus reform. For a while, it wasn't discussed very much, I think we really need backing because it's a plan. There's some great words. They've diagnosed the issues with buses well. We need some to be backed up by real strategies, real proposals. We need maps. Which routes are going to be updated, graded? Which areas? There weren't any network maps in the thing. And it would be good to have something that was complementary for trains and trams as well. We've still got trains that are, as I mentioned before, every 40 minutes Sunday mornings, 30 minutes in the evenings. Even some trams are only every half hour at night. And if you want a base frequency of, say, every 20 minutes, you can then have your even connections between your buses, your trains and trams, say a 20-minute base and your 10 minutes on your major routes. Then you've got the starting of a really good network that can let you go everywhere, even if it's whether it's be to the CBD or cross suburban, you could more easily change between services. That's the sort of vision that this plan should be trying to maximise, not only just for buses, but across all modes, and hopefully it will work in with that. And also into planning visions as well, things like around the principal public transport network. So although it's a bus plan, it really should slot in with your land use planning and your train and tram planning, and also foreshadow some of the things like the suburban rail loop. So the big test is the funding and the budget, and you judge this plan not by what's in this plan, but what's in the next state budget and the budget after that and the budget after that. So that's my comments on it. You can read the plan linked, and I'll have a look at some of the comments and I can answer questions, and I'm open for discussion. Okay, just having a look at some of the comments. Bus of Doom, yep, changes on the Werribee line. That's the 20-minute upgrade Sunday morning. I was pleasantly surprised to see this is from Thermite Be Giants. I was pleasantly no mention of onboard comfort upgrades like Wi-Fi or USB charging. Often fictions of Western transport agencies. Yeah, it's good that they are really talking about the nuts and bolts of what makes a service useful. Your basics of frequency, basics of span, speed, directness. There's some really good diagnosis of the issues and suggestions. In class 468, how about a standardised weekend timetable? Instead of Sunday afternoon timetables, Canva did this decades ago. Now, I should mention Canva. There's always people worse off than you, and a lot of their bus timetables, they had issues with driver staffing, still only every 2 hours on weekends. They were once mostly hourly, then they reformed the bus network. They put in some direct or rapid routes, which was good, but they left a lot of the local routes on. In fact, they cut services back to every 2 hours, which is quite poor on weekends. But the concept of standardised Saturday and Sunday timetables, I think, is good. We largely have it on the trains, at least in trams, from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. and even on Saturday and Sunday evening timetables are often similar on the trains, less so on the trams. Smart buses are arguably, same frequency on weekends every half hour. Both should be better though. But yeah, I think generally speaking, I think it is a good principle. It will cost a bit of money. Like we've got some bus routes, particularly in the western suburbs of Melbourne. You've got bus routes like, let's take the 472 for instance. Runs from Moonee Ponds, Footscray, Williamstown. That runs every 15 minutes off peak on weekdays, every 20 minutes on Saturdays, and it drops down to every 50 minutes on Sundays. 408 is another. It's quite a frequent service Monday to Saturday, but it drops only to 40 minutes on a Sunday, even though it goes through High Point, and High Point is a busy shopping centre on Sunday. 410, Footscray to Sunshine. every 15 minutes, Monday to Friday. I think it's 20 on Saturday. I think it's only hourly on Sunday. So, yeah, definitely there's a lot of historical cases of bus routes being dramatically less frequent on Sunday than Saturday. And I think it would be desirable to boost them up to your Saturday type service level. And potentially on, you could then have your public holidays as operating on a Sunday timetable rather than a Saturday timetable. And the benefit of that is that reduces, if you're to do that now, that would mean a lot of service cuts. But if you're to get Sunday timetables up to a reasonable level of service, the benefit of having public holiday timetables on a Sunday timetable is you don't have confusion like on Saturday nights where you've got all night service, which you wouldn't have on a public holiday evening. So that's just a small thing. But yeah, I think that the I think Saturday, Sunday, it would improve legibility, particularly where you've got big differences on Sundays, because a lot of the cases, a lot of the routes that got upgraded in 2006 to 2010, they had Monday to Saturday service. They'd probably finished at 7 at night. So the main service addition was Sunday, and hourly was the safety net, so that's what they got, even though they're quite busy routes. And the same with 733. That's another very busy route that's only got an hourly service. Okay, just having a look at some of the comments. How many new bus lanes? That's from the Bus of Doom and Priority. Yeah, space, it's a war out there. You take space away from motorists, then you have all sorts of issues there. And you've got cases of like the Stud Road bus lane where a bus lane was put on for the smart bus, but the smart bus was only every 15 minutes and the lane appeared empty most of the time, and that was eventually the buses lost that and became traffic again. Yeah, good that the Victoria Park shuttle seems to be a goer still. Regional bus, no mention of network reform in regional areas. Now, to be fair, regional bus networks have been reformed a lot quicker than Melbourne. Like Geelong had a big new network reform in 2015, and a lot of the Geelong local routes are every 20 minutes off peak. So they're actually better than a lot of bus routes in Melbourne. Their operating hours are a bit limited. But yeah, Geelong did have a big bus network reform. Ballarat and Bendigo had, I think, some quite big reforms maybe 10 years ago. And there's been quite a few, and Latrobe Valley has some big reforms. So to be fair, there's still an issue in regional areas where if you want to use the bus to catch the train, especially if you're going to Melbourne, often you can't because the bus operating hours are much shorter than they are in Melbourne. And you need to start earlier to catch the train, and the buses are often not operating then, or at night if they are, then there's an issue getting home at night because the buses will have finished earlier on. Well, that's some great questions here. What local network would you reform first if you had your choice? That's from N-Class. If I had my choice and very little money, there's some areas in terms of social need. I would be looking very closely at the Greater Danlong network. There's some of their bus routes have higher than average bus usage. You've also got social demographics, which have a lot of low-income people that might be using the bus off-peak a lot, on weekends a lot. But Greater Dandenong was really shortchanged about 10, 15 years ago when it got the minimum standards upgrade. A lot of their routes, like the 802, 804, they were just left to run 5 or 6 days a week. Even the 800, which runs through Chadstone, Oakley, Princess Highway, main road route, it's only every 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon and not at all on Sunday. So Greater Dandenong was very badly shortchanged. I've written some blog posts about how you've got lots of bus routes that overlap in the Keysborough and Noble Park area and into Springvale. And, a lot of the bus routes there are only once an hour. If you had bus reform, you could get them up to every 30 minutes. I think that the patronage on some of them justifies service every 20 minutes instead of every hour. And that should probably be 7 days a week on routes like the 813. And I think they would get use because if you put extra buses on in places like Noble Park, Springvale, people get on them and use them. If you run them in places like Brighton or back of Eltham and places like that, then they might not use them. So I think you need to be selective. Greater Danlong would be a great place to do a bus review. It would be quite complex though. Another area I would look at is you've got a big cluster around La Trobe Uni, Heidelberg, Preston, Reservoir, Thomastown. You've got quite good demographics for buses. You have some quite big trip generators, Northland Shopping Centre, La Trobe Uni, the hospitals at Heidelberg. A lot of the buses there are only every 22, 23 minutes. You could really simplify routes for very little money and have your much more direct, frequent service between your major centres. Like you've got routes like the 551 between Heidelberg and La Trobe Uni, but it only runs 5 days a week. Its frequency is only every half hour. That doesn't connect with trains every 20 minutes. So there's also a lot of duplication and overlap. For instance, you've got the 527 that overlaps a lot of the 903 smart bus around Northland and Preston and Coburg, and you should be able to get a bus every 10 minutes through there without much in the way of cost. So and you can also straighten a lot of the routes. So I would be looking at areas around in the northeast, around Heidelberg, Preston, La Trobe Uni, Northland. In terms of increasing bus service, where I would unashamedly buy lots of buses and put them on the road, I'd be looking at Tarneet, Truganina, Williams Landing, even Craigieburn. The buses out there have really good patronage performance. It's a very densely populated area because of small blocks and high workforce participation. So I'd be upgrading those services, up to every 20 minutes, giving them long operating hours, running a lot of them until midnight. And I think they'd be getting a lot of usage. And a good thing about the bus network in the city of Wyndham in particular is that the bus routes are very efficient, because you've got on your main roads, your bus route might start at Tarneet Station and then it will go to a Werribee line station like Hoppers or Werribee itself or Williams Landing. So that means that your bus, even in the morning peak, it will be taking peak loads of people to the Werribee line, and then when it turns back, it'll take people peak periods loads up to the Geelong line. So that is more reliable. That is more efficient usage than where you've got routes like the Doncaster routes that start in Doncaster, Templestowe. They fill up on their way into the city, then they go the backward journey back towards Doncaster, and they run much less with much less passengers. So that's one of the good things about having a feeder bus service that connects into the trains. It's operationally very efficient. It carries peak passengers all the time. So yeah, I'd be looking at some of the areas like Tarneet and Wyndham. Frankston also, their bus network hasn't changed for years and years, and Frankston South needs a bit of a service upgrade. You wouldn't necessarily run hugely frequent services there, but definitely simplify the routes. City of Knox, it's a suburban density area that hasn't had a proper bus network put in for at least 30 years. You've got some roads that have only one bus a day when they should be getting a full service. So there's I think there's a big, even in Bayswater area, there's some big scope there. You also need to think about an integrated buses and trains. In the case of Tarneet area, you need your Geelong trains to be every 20 minutes, 7 days a week, at least as far as Wyndham Vale. So then that would more easily connect with your buses. That should be every 20 minutes. And same with past beyond Ringwood and Knox. In fact, this stymies bus reform out there. Your trains are only every half an hour. Less frequency in Ferntree Gully than you get in Geelong. You should be running your trains every 20 minutes off peak on the weekday, just like what happens on weekends. They actually have a better weekend service than a weekday service. Then you can have your trains every 10 minutes from Ringwood, and you turn up and go service. And that would allow you to run your main bus routes every 20 minutes with some better connections. So need to think about trains as well as buses there. So yeah, that's the answer to your question. Let's have a look from Joseph. Any ideas to get a more effective political message to justify bus lanes? Public enemy number one with talkback alongside bike lanes. Joseph, really, really important question. I think you need, first of all, your bus lanes, you really need to be demonstrating that you are carrying more people than, you don't want them to be seen as empty. It's no good having a bus lane, but only having an infrequent bus. One bus every 15 minutes is not good enough. You have to have really frequent services. One other thing I had an idea is maybe you wouldn't do it right now, but pre-COVID, we should be having, and this should be tied up to the ticketing system, you should be having automated signs on the backs of buses saying this bus is carrying 70 people, or on the back of an articulated bus, this bus is carrying 45 passengers or 40 cars off the road. Imagine if all these 40 people were driving. It could even be real-time information tied to your Mikey system, so it knows how many people are on the bus. So it's a signal to motorists that the bus lanes are working, because it's a bit of an illusion, because bus lanes can appear empty. Even if you had buses every, quite frequent intervals, buses can appear empty because you think, oh, hey, from the driver's point of view, hey, my car could be in front of that bus and I could be getting a quicker trip. Why don't I have access to it? So you really need to counter that with data, preferably in real time, displayed on the back of buses. This bus is carrying 40 people. And then that can try and explain and communicate the message. But you do really need a working bus network with good patronage and good frequency. So you might look at your bus priority first at your interchanges or areas where you've got a huge number of buses already, like say between Oakley and Chadstone, you in Monash Uni. You'd be looking at your very selected areas, and maybe later on you can look at your bigger areas where there's bus lanes. So yeah, but no, really important question. And political saleability, I think, is important. And you want to convince drivers that these bus lanes are actually good for you. They're taking other people that would otherwise be in their cars off the road, so you are getting a better drive. So yeah, you need to appeal to and their self-interest. Okay, a simple thing. Yeah. Thermite be giants. One simple thing that route service standards could drive. Google Maps transit feature shows Melbourne train and tram routes, but not high quality bus services. And that dates for me. Even in the Melbourne Street direction, you'd have tram routes marked, tram lines marked, trains, the buses. They might be numbered on the map, but not the lines, so people don't know where they go. Yeah, you probably might be need to have the concept of frequent network concept, your 10-minute network. There's actually about 10 routes that could be upgraded relatively cheaply to do that. You probably need more than that across Melbourne, but the idea of a high frequency turn up and go service, and you really need to tie it with frequency. If it's not every 10 minutes, it doesn't qualify. And 15 minutes was good in the time that smart buses were introduced. But at the time that smart buses were introduced, the main train lines that they intercepted, like Ringwood, Danlong, Frankston, Glen Waverley, they were every 15 minutes off peak. That was all before the rail plans that said, okay, we'll have a 10 and 20-minute tiered rail service. Now we've got that, the smart buses need to follow suit for that as well. Otherwise, you don't get your even connections. Okay, given some tram services have lower service quality than some of the more intensely used buses, it could be an opportunity to put some buses on an equal footing. Or maybe I'd rather upgrade the trams. Like there's only really just the tram 82. That's the main. That's the standout thing. It's only every 20 minutes off peak weekdays. Although there's a fair number of tram routes that are every 12 minutes weekdays. St Kilda road routes, like the 67. In fact, that would be a next tram network reform. It would be great to get your, even though it's probably not as high a priority as for the buses, it would be great to get a lot of them up to every 10 minutes. Pre-COVID, a lot of the routes in the 495, which runs every 10 minutes in the peak. Yes, that's one of the top performing bus routes in Melbourne. And that's an example of people say, oh, no one will use the bus to get to the station. Where you've got parking pressures at stations, limited space, then the 495 is a standout performer. It started off as being every 20 minutes during the peak, and it's had to get upgrades to every 10 minutes because of its usage. Do you think that this plan could lead bus-driven urban renewal in concept with LGA's tram and tram infrastructure has done already? It needs subsidy. It needs funding. You really need the rapid network to be aligned with your principal public transport network. You might need concessions in relation to developers and parking. That if you locate your development near the principal public transport network, then you don't need to provide parking spots because you've got a good network. And you should probably also be thinking of not just being on one PPTN route, but also where you're on an intersection where you've got multiple routes, so you can travel in 4 or 6 directions. That would probably be the best location for low car development. The plan by itself won't. Just need to back it with really good service planning that simplifies the network, really good frequencies, turn up and go, really good information and marketing and visibility. Whether it's, maybe you should paint orange lines along roads so that people think of for your frequent buses, so that people start to think of them like tram routes. So there is a bit of a mentality and thinking that we need to overcome in Melbourne to get buses seen as the top tier of transport, because so many buses are not. And I remind you again, there's just 2 bus routes in all of Melbourne that run 7 days that have service every 10 minutes or better off peak. That's the 246 and the 402. Whereas Sydney, even their single bus reviews, they might be implementing 5 or 6 routes every 10 minutes. Not only that, but they're every 10 minutes, 7 days a week. So we've been trailing way beyond Sydney. They've had a Liberal government there that has been putting a lot of money into service. They've promised a lot, and I think they've delivered a lot. They've been very radical in their bus network reforms. It's a bit of a policy gap in that Labor has been very strong on your infrastructure. They've been historically very weak on your service aspect. We haven't seen much from the opposition. David Davis, we haven't seen much bus advocacy from him. The Greens seem to be more involved. Their favourite seems to be electric vehicles rather than buses. They did have quite an ambitious bus plan before the last state election, but other things have occupied their minds since. So definitely need to get political advocacy from all sides of politics to try and get buses going. Should this new rapid route designation have a route naming distinction, like giving them an R? Personally, no. Maybe there should be route distinctions for your frequent routes. Some people have argued there should be 2 numbered bus routes or something. But no, one possibility, and that's partly done, is maybe routes ending in 0 should be all more frequent routes. Like you already have that on some, like 220 is a more frequent route, ends in 0. Maybe you should, they could use the 900 series for more frequent routes. It's funny that with Smart Bus, we only got halfway. Like we've got a whole lot of other routes that, like the 223, the 216, 220, that are Smart Bus-like services. In fact, they are sometimes better than Smart Bus, but they never actually got a Smart Bus branding. It's funny that the plan describes or has a picture of a Smart Bus, doesn't talk about the future of Smart Bus. And another school of thought is rather than be having a frequent bus branding, you have a frequent network branding. So that applies for the train network, tram network, and your better buses. Do you think, let's see, we've got 13 people watching. I think we had a peak of just over 20, so I think that's good for the first few. It's been really good with all the various questions. I've probably spoken for too long, but I'd encourage you to read the plan. I'll been going for over an hour. It started at 4 and it's now 5:15. So I'll just wait to see if there are any more questions or other points, and we'll soon call it a night. Bus of Doom. I hope future interchange upgrades better consider the transfer between train and bus. Yes, definitely. Many cases where transport time is excessive. Yes, there's one case where there's even cases where you almost think they might have designed they wanted a better interchange, like at Clayton, and then you look at where you can see the bus from where you are, but no, there's a door and there's no Mikey gates or no Mikey barriers or anything there. So there's a risk, I think, with some of the level crossing removals. Some are good, some are not so good. That other things other than intermodal transfer seem to have taken higher priority. You look at how things are in Perth, where on the Joondalup line and the Mandurah line, you've got the buses are just a short escalator ride immediately above the train platform. Whereas here at Williams Landing, for instance, yes, you go on the bus and it goes over the bridge, but then you've got to wait for the bus to loop around and end up near the station, and then you have to go up some more steps and more ramps and whatever. So, I think that's something that we've done quite poorly. And even things like station exits. A key thing is, even our bigger stations have just one exit, and they might upgrade them but not do anything about the exits. Admittedly, it would be an expensive project, but I think important. For instance, the north side of South Yarra, that would improve the ped shed for that, and also Frankston. Having a northern entrance for Frankston would greatly improve your connectivity to buses. So, as well as being able to walk to the shopping centre and residential development. Bus stations should definitely have multiple entrances, preferably closely tied to the bus routes. So thank you for Crabsun10 for watching. Thanks to all for watching, and I might put this on my. If you want to comment further, then you can on the comments to this video. I might do a blog post that basically embeds this video later on. I'm not going to rewrite what I've spoken here on the blog, so I'll encourage people to watch this video. I might also include a link on Twitter. So just a reminder that my YouTube channel is Melbourne on Transit. If already, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and of course follow me on Twitter as well. Thank you, and it's been great, and hope that maybe we can have more of these occasionally when big plans come out. Thank you and good night.